Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully that's working. Yep. Well, as you can see, I have spent a lot of time in the clay soil here, but I still have short legs, so I've got a bit more time to spend here before I get those long legs that Charlie's been promising me. So this afternoon, I'm going to be talking to you about a bit about the history of the Knepp estate and the introduction of the herbivores here, the subsequent rewilding of the land, the wildlife monitoring that we've been doing, and then I'm going to focus in on the success stories of the turtle dove and the nightingale. So this is the Knepp estate. It's about 3,500 acres, about 1,400 hectares, and it's about 7 kilometres from the top to the toe. And we're currently down here in the southern part of the estate, and some of us are going to go for a walk around here later on, and others are going to go and explore the northern block and the middle block, which is the Repton Park. But later on in my talk, I'm going to hone in on the southern block, which is just over about 1,000 acres. So as you can see, from Charlie's talk, we've learned about the wheeled clay and how that was really bad for farming. We've got lots of wet habitat here, so we've got these little streams running through. We've got a hammer pond, we've got a tributary of the River Ada and a mill pond as well. So it's a very wet site, and what was really bad for farming turns out to be fantastic for wildlife. So as Charlie says, we've had a long history of maximised farming here. So despite really intensifying the farming here, 600 dairy cows, 2,000 acres of arable, and onto wall-to-wall production. So these fields around Pound Farm here really farmed right up to the boundaries there, and the hedges were flailed to within an inch of their life, ditches cleared out at the end of every year, and most importantly, the compaction of the soil around those lovely old veteran trees. So things changed, the rewilding kicked in, and these animals were introduced here. So these are the drivers behind the project that are kick-starting all the natural processes here again. So we've got the longhorn cows, we've got the Tamworth pig, red deer, Exmoor ponies, and the fallow deer. And it's all about natural processes, about them feeding in different ways, moving around the landscape in different ways, and having an influence on the vegetation structure. So it's all about being a process-led project rather than a target-led project. So down in the southern block, this is what happened. The fields were taken out of production over a 6-year period from about 2000 to 2006, and in about 2009 the animals were introduced. So there was a bit of a period of time there where there's no human influence and there's no animals nibbling. So you get a really interesting vegetation pulse, which shows in this video here. Hopefully. Click. Oh, let's try it again. There you go. So you can see this is really interesting, the amount of scrub that's come up here. And this is the secret to some of the success stories that we've had here. And as different fields were taken out of production over a 6-year period, a real mosaic every year, patchwork of different fields taken out, means that no two fields are the same. Every one's a little bit different. You've got some fields that are full of wild rose, other fields that are full of brambles and oak saplings coming up, and other fields that have got sallow groves coming up. And again, you've got those animals in there now influencing that vegetation. We've had some really interesting records coming up here. So overall, we've collected 24,274 records, and that boils down to about 2,484 species in the database. We've collected 75 nationally notable and scarce species, 74 biodiversity action plan species, that includes research BAP species, and 22 red list species of bird recorded all year round, not just breeding. And other species as well, such as this red data book species that Charlie mentioned, the lovely scarce chaser, thriving in the scrapes and the streams and the river restoration. This lovely violet door beetle, Geotrupes mutata, turned up here a couple of years ago. It hadn't been recorded here for about 50 years. And it's a species that likes grazed pastures, and it likes cattle and pony dung. And we have plenty of that here, and because we're not putting any ivermectins into the system, no wormers into the cattle, it means that they've got a lot of good dung to go bearing about in. And in one cow pat alone, we picked up 23 different species of dung beetle here. So it's really important to learn about pesticides and what they're doing in our landscape. And this guy here is so exciting. We had 3 of them in 1 year. Lovely little micro moth, a Solifa rufanus, turned up here. It feeds on the rootstock of tansy and mugwort. And in the scrub that you saw in the video a moment ago, we do a bit of mist netting in there, and through the autumn we're just starting to find out how important it is as a staging post for migrating birds on their way south. So we know how important scrub is for breeding species, but we're finding all sorts of interesting birds such as tree pipit, grasshopper warbler, like in this picture here, and redstart, all moving through during migration time. And in 2015, we had some invertebrate surveys here. We counted up over 560 different species, including this Rhinocylus conicus, which is a thistle feeder, as well as this Pilomastoma, which is a tortoise beetle that feeds on fleabane. So as well as picking up lots of interesting species that are saproxylic species, so insects that go into dead wood, we're picking up species that we can link to the grazing and the disturbance that the animals make here, like these two guys. On the river restoration, we're seeing species like lapwing come back and nest here. And really exciting last year to find that we had tree nesting peregrine. So there's only a handful of tree nesting peregrines in the UK, and we have one of those pairs now. So really exciting stuff happening. And it's all down to all of these lovely recorders, all the support and enthusiasm that we have behind this rewilding project and what we're finding here. And we couldn't do it without all of these people. This is just a small selection of people that are involved with the recording here. So we're really grateful for everything that they do. So now I'm going to focus in on the nightingale. As I'm sure you all know, it's really suffered huge declines. Over the last 40 years, it's had a 90% decline, and it's being linked to the lack of coppicing in woodland now. So we're really interested to see how we are seeing so many here in a scrubland habitat, and where the hedges are grown out over that 9-year period. We're seeing these lovely thick hedges, about 8 or 9 metres thick. They were once flailed with an inch of their life, and now we're seeing these lovely thick hedges with this cathedral structure that the nightingale really likes. So it will be hopping about in here, down on the bare ground, feeding on beetles and moths on the ground, and then it needs this lovely skirt of vegetation along the base of the hedge where it will be nesting, so this bit here. So you might find it out on the edge here nesting. And these scalloped edges, these lovely scalloped edges, we think we can link with the cow because of the way it grazes and moves in and browses along the edges there. So here you go, there's the longhorn cow, and they're choosing to go in there and feed on the sallow, to feed on the vegetation around the base of those hedges that makes those nice little clumps of vegetation for the nightingale to nest in. The sallow scrub, where it's collapsing in on itself, is providing another good spot. We've got a couple of different territories within sallow scrub here for the nightingales nesting as well. So again, we're seeing that, and perhaps we can link this with the pigs, with the rootling that they do in the sallow that comes up in the places that they've been rootling. And we're just starting to see nightingales nesting in these little individual bushes that are moving out from the edges of the fields. So again, we've got 2 nightingale nests in this kind of habitat as well. So it's been fascinating for me to be studying nightingales in all these different habitats on one site. And this year, we're really excited to have recorded 19 nightingales, singing nightingales here in just over 1,000 acres, whereas at the beginning of the project, there were none here, although 2 or 3 had been recorded previous to the beginning of the project. And again, back to pesticides. We're not putting any pesticides or ivermectins into the system here, so this means an abundance of the insects that the nightingales will be feeding both themselves and their young on. We do a bit of nest finding here. We're very lucky to have a very good nest finder tutor that comes and helps us. It's quite a long, hard, laborious job looking for nightingale nests, as you can imagine. It takes about 4 or 5 hours, and that's how long it took to find the nest in here. It was just inside here, about 1 metre in from the edge, about arm's length in, and about that far off the ground. And so you have to do a lot of sitting and watching. It's a nice thing to have to do. And here you go, there's some chicks that we found in the nest there, and we were able to ring them. And we're just starting a ringing project here of the nightingales, where we are able to ring the chicks. We're also able to ring juvenile nightingales and adult nightingales that we pick up in mist netting as well. So during migration, we picked up these 2 juveniles. We heard them croaking around the net rides here. And then sort of later on to September, right up to the end of September, they were still kicking around in that scrub, feeding up on the insects before they headed south. And then occasionally we're lucky to pick up the odd male one as well on where we can put nets across rides. And actually, I think it was this one here that we caught 2 years ago, and we caught it again the other day, so it's still kicking around, breeding here in the same kind of spot. So onto the turtle dove. Again, we're seeing huge declines in this. But in 1938, Walpole Bond wrote about the turtle dove in a history of Sussex birds. And he says one of his friends on a site just near Horsham, so it could have even been here, recorded 17 turtle dove nests in an hour. We can't imagine that abundance, yet we're seeing this huge decline in them. So we've seen a 91% decline in the last 20 years in the UK, and about a 78% decline since 1980 in the whole of Europe. And Operation Turtle Dove says it's our fastest declining breeding bird here in the UK. So who here has heard this sound? In this year? Who's heard it this year? A few hands going up, that's lovely to see, but it is a declining sound in our countryside, isn't it? And I'm hoping that this afternoon that some of you might get to hear it when we're out and about. So before we attract all the turtle doves in from the local area, I better turn that off. So I'm really lucky as part of my job here again to be able to go out and survey for turtle doves. We've got a lovely team of volunteers that we go out in the field. We do very structured surveys. We have to meet up at 4:30 in the morning, bleary-eyed. We all head out, but we're rewarded because it is absolutely amazing. I've never heard so many turtle doves in one area. So my area that I covered this year had 6 singing turtle doves. And it was just amazing. You can't explain the joy that you get from hearing that many at once. Because it's only the kind of sound that you hear when you're in France or Spain, where they have a bit more of an abundance of these species. And this is the kind of habitat we're finding them in. Again, those lovely growing out thickets, normally a tree that they can sit and perch in and sing. And actually in this tree here, I had a couple of turtle doves having a bit of a purr off the other morning. And so that was lovely to see, sort of 2 in that close proximity. We also find them in abundance in the lags here, so there's nice little water, sort of floodplains that we've got going up along the streams here. And again, there's a dead tree there that it might sit and perch and sing from. And these small sallow trees are also a nesting spot for turtle doves. And also, we shouldn't underplay the importance of water for turtle doves as well. They need that water nearby to their nesting site because it helps them produce the crop milk that they feed their young. That's what they rear their young on. So these watery habitats are very important at the chick rearing stage as well. And I think we can link the success of the turtle doves here, not only with the thickets and the sallow scrub coming up, but it's these guys here, rootling away. Great sound effects as well with that, isn't there? So what they're doing several important jobs for us. But the most important job I think the turtle doves are doing is stirring up the seed bed. Gosh, I can't really speak over that, can I? They're stirring up the seed bed when they're doing this rootling. And it's very quick to recover, so it diversifies the sward. And as a result of that, I went out and had a look the other day and I was able to take photos of bird's foot trefoil and other vetches and scarlet pimpernel and white clover. And these are all the food plants that the turtle dove feeds on. They feed on the seeds of these food plants. So we can link the food source of the turtle dove with the pig's rootling. And certainly the young, once they're fledged from the nest, within the first 3 weeks, they only go about 120 metres away from their nest site. And during that time, they're looking for the same kind of food source as the adults. So it's that all-importance link of the habitat for nesting and the habitat for feeding in as well. And of course, the turtle dove have tiny little legs, so just like me, hasn't got used to the clay yet. They need these little roots in to be able to feed on those food plants. And so the pigs, again, are supplying that little root in for them. So not only do we have all of these fantastic and rare and notable species here at Knepp, we're also providing a habitat for a lot of the wider countryside species that we're seeing in decline in our wider countryside. We're not an old site, we're less than 20 years old, so we're just seeing the beginning of all the exciting things that can happen here. And I don't think we could have set out to do this any better if we had a management plan. We certainly wouldn't have even thought about creating turtle dove habitat. That's what, for me, makes Knepp so exciting and unusual. We hadn't anticipated any of these successes. And really, if we'd aimed to manage for nightingales and purple emperors, we might have been advised to create coppice woodland. But instead, we have the scrub that we see here today at Knepp, and we're seeing all sorts of success come out of that. So what is happening is species are arriving here and showing us different preferences. And this is the delight of a process-led project. And it's making us, putting us back in a position of observing and learning, which is the complete delight of this project. So if anyone would ever like to get involved with the surveying here, we would love to have you on board and your ideas as well. Yeah, I'm going to be around, so come and ask me questions on the walk, and we can talk a bit more about turtle doves and nightingales. Thank you very much.
Patrick Barkham from The Guardian. Question for Charlie, really. It's, what's your best guess about the subsidy regime that Michael Gove will create post-Brexit? And do you think it has any potential to create more Knepps?
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because I think Michael Gove is one of those sort of people that actually might come up with some very brave thinking. He may be wanting to launch his political career again, and some of those ideas that he might come up with might be actually quite interesting. I know that Mr. Gove came up with some really interesting ideas on education. Patrick, thank you very much for that question. I think the answer is that I'm feeling confident in that we will have to work out how to do things differently. I think that some of those differences will be actually quite interesting for nature. So I'm hoping that Mr. Gove will be actually very supportive for conservation and nature, and will come up with some radical ideas.
Yeah.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you. Philip Merricks, Elney NNR. Charlie, congratulations to you and your team on everything. It's been an inspiring day. Clearly, I thought the most important eco bit today is, of course, what you've been referring to, the economics. If we want more areas like this, and quite clearly, I'm sure Michael Gove will realise the sense of things like this, the economics are the crucial thing. And I'm glad your talk was titled, how the economics stack up. And it's pretty clear from what you said, they do stack up well. And the key point is they're likely to stack up even better in the future. You referred to our 800 suckler cows. I'm afraid that the economics of suckler cows are over getting on for 3,500 acres of national nature reserve don't stack up at all. Suckler cows, that's cows that rear a calf, not cows that are milked, are economically very dubious. And we use other people's cows so they can take the financial risk, and we manage those cows on the nature reserve. But that is going to be, that lowland extensive grazing is going to be even worse post-Brexit, because we're going to be subject to all sorts of imports of lamb and beef from dubious countries and dubious quality. So my point is that, and it does tie into the previous question, I think this way forward, if the economics stack up, then this will stack up in the future.
Thank you. John Lawton. I wanted to follow up on what Patrick and Philip's just asked. Charlie, it would be great, wouldn't it, if a lot of your fellow landowners and farmers in this part of the world did the same thing, but you have the advantage of being the first mover. And if other people try and sort of do the same thing, it begins to eat into your market some of the time. Have you thoughts about that? I mean, from a nature conservation point of view, more, bigger, better and joined is a great idea, and you get more people to do it. But not everybody can run safaris. Not everybody can do the kind of things you're doing unless you begin to bring the price down.
I think we've only just begun to tap into that market. And what I'm hoping for, and I've just seen a nod from Christopher Price, who knows a lot more than I do about this because he's nationally looking at it. What I'm hoping for that some of my fellow landowners in this region start to think in the same way and start to do the similar sort of thing. And then we can then connect each other up. So I can have my safari goers going down towards the downs, looking at the downland, carrying on for a 5-day journey across landscapes. What about that? What about joining up?
I think that's brilliant. That's the answer I want.
I think there is a huge market, and we've only just started to tap into it. And I think we all want to join up together. Actually, we want to make this a big move and a big movement.
Behind you.
I have a question for Charlie and then a comment for Penny, if I may. First of all, Charlie, do you mind me asking about your legal setup? Are you a network of limited companies, or are you sole trader, or what? But before you answer that, I just want to congratulate Penny on something that she said about not having a management plan. I had the privilege of chairing Scottish Natural Heritage in the Highlands of Scotland for 7 years, and I was responsible for 1,247 SSSIs, every one of which had a management plan. And after a couple of years in this task, I began to realise that the biggest problem was the management plans. And about 90% of them were completely unnecessary. They were simply silly bureaucratic exercises taking up time and public money, when nature, actually left alone, was doing a far better job. And I completely accept that if you have a rare orchid and you need to manage the meadow around it to maintain that rare orchid, then you need a management plan. But for many, particularly larger nature reserves, management plans very often get in the way. So thank you for raising that point. I'm with you all the way. Back to you, Charlie, on your legal status, please.
A sole trader in most of the estate, but also trusteeship for my children. So it's in trust, some of it, and so on. So it's slightly complex.
So you have to pay 40% on all your rents?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yep. And just on your other point, John, I think I think where we think that Knepp is relevant in terms of conservation efforts for changing things is that the bits and pieces between where the hot spots are that have been looked after and managed in your SSSIs and your nature reserves and all the rest of it. It's the areas between those areas that we feel this could be most useful for. It's not really wanting to risk the areas that are already high value areas which are highly managed. We don't feel that that's appropriate in a lot of cases, but this sort of project could be appropriate where you're wanting to join up the dots.
Alistair Driver, Rewilding Britain. Charlie, as you know, in Rewilding Britain, we're looking to try and find places around the country where we can take rewilding up a scale and up the pace as well. And that's proving to be very positive so far, certainly in my early months with Rebecca on this mission. But you obviously, as John just referred to, you were the pioneer of this. Do you see your neighbours being ready to buy into a similar approach? You talked about linking with the Downs, but what about your immediate neighbours? Is there a possibility that this can now expand significantly within a 5 to 10 year time frame?
It's been very difficult to convince people. We have actually got 300 acres added to the whole project from our neighbour. He happens to be my cousin, so he may be influenced by me unduly, but he has taken down his boundary fence between him and us. He was able to apply for HLS money, which he wouldn't have been able to do if he hadn't joined. He was able to be part of the fun of actually having a greater landscape under the same sorts of management. So he, I suspect, feels that he's gained about 3,500 acres where I've gained about 300 acres. So, but in terms of how that's worked, it's worked incredibly well. We split the income from the animals to how much land is put into the whole pie. So it's a very straightforward percentage split, and it works really well. So I really, really hope that other people will start to come in on these sorts of things. And I hope eventually to build a land bridge over the A24 and connect myself up with my cousin Rick, who's sitting over there.
Sorry to be me again, but I probably won't never get another chance like this at my age. But I've got to go back to soil. I just got to go back to soil. And Charlie and me went to a thing in the Houses of Parliament once where they were talking about soil. And it was one of the first times I'd actually heard the cost of flooding. The cost of flooding. The cost to the community of flooding. And then we've got to add in the cost of the flooding to farmers because it's our soil. It's our soil going down to the sea. We spend a lot of money now fertilising the sea. And insurance companies spend a lot of money on the cost of that flooding. So we're well into people in the forestry world talking about how trees can play their part. But on these marginal lands, why aren't they thinking about that? And maybe Mr. Gove might think, well, this is a good one for me, where he can start thinking about lands in marginal areas where we know now, I mean, there's been lots of studies done on the potential of these floods and what causes them. And of course, I mean, the sheep moors, the land maggot moors are some of the worst places for this. So I'll finish with one thing, and that is that there's bound to be a flood this year. And you will see on television people mud out of their houses. It's not water they're pushing out, it's flood mud. So what we've got to do is change one word from flood water to flood mud, and then we can start really thinking about it. Because the water causes the mud, and it's the mud that we're losing. So let's start thinking about calling things flood mud. Next time all you bureaucrats write something, put down flood mud, please.
Vera. I just wonder, Charlie, about when I was in the Kruger, there has been several private owners who connected their land to the Kruger, and they had a kind of privilege that they could bring around people there, and I think there was a rule on every 300 hectares you could have one bed, so for staying people. The funny thing is that, in fact, they had the more value of a much bigger area, their own estate. So that may be, do you think that could be the case in your situation when neighbors join your area, that you could have more value to offer because you scale up with the thing and also in relation to the natural processes that are possible? And as you have seen in your case, more species of which you did not expect they could come back,
I think, Francis, yes, and maybe the question should be directed at Anthony, who gave up his right to plough and crop and gave his land to us. And what are your...
Make you redundant. I mean, to answer the question, personally, it's been a fantastic addition of being able to join the project, which has taken a little bit of convincing, because obviously one is used to conventional farming and the view of agricultural land being quite well maintained, neat and tidy, and all this kind of stuff. But over the years, it's proven to be financially very beneficial, from loss-making arable land, as Charlie has spoken about, to joining in this great project. So not only has it been financially beneficial, but very proud to join, as it were, this bit as well. As our other neighbours, to the east and west, there are obviously natural boundaries, the A24 and other roads, but one can only hope that what they see as being a success both from an ecological point of view as well as financially, that they may join the club. So one can hope. Rick.
May I add one word? I didn't mention, if you add more areas, then Knepp, but also the others, get what they call emergent properties. That means 1-to-1 is not 2, but 1-to-1 will 3, or 1-to-1 will be 4. So the number of species will rise much higher. You get more species that need a larger area. And so even adding a smaller part can value up your area much more than simply you think of adding, for instance, 300 or 400 hectares.
Poor Ian.
Thank you. I've got a couple of comments in terms of your talk. It's fantastic, and I think this has been one of the best learning experiences I've had in about 15 years. But I must say that what is really interesting is we can look at the past, the present, and the future. So the Weald, we now realise, was not a backwater, but it was, in the Bronze Age, 2,000 years BC, an extensive arable landscape. And it failed, because it then became abandoned. We know that it was an extensive arable landscape, because look at the Ouse, the Arun, and the Ada. They are full of 12, 13, 40 metres of mud, of sediment, which has eroded out of the Weald and has choked up those river valleys. We know that because paleoecologically we've been studying it. And then suddenly we said, where did it come from? It's not the chalk downlands, it's been the Weald. That failed as an arable landscape and has now been then grown over, and it became the wooded landscape. And so that's something that is interesting. But the other thing is the photographs that both of you showed of the Knepp landscape now, I was amazingly struck, and I said, these are the types of landscapes that I see in archaeological textbooks that we are trying to reconstruct as classic Mesolithic, early post-glacial, pre-major woodland landscapes. Those photographs, the one of the deer you had in that woodland landscape, was exactly the type of prehistoric, wildwood, natural landscape that I, as an environmental archaeologist, would be putting up there to show my students existed, what existed in the past. And therefore it just shows that what is happening now is nature, is what should be there, and it's just really quite overwhelming to see that that's all coming back together, and we're not having a manicured agri-pastoral landscape, a managed landscape, we're having a landscape that is being used properly. Thank you.
Vicky, I just had a question for Penny, actually. Have you had a lot of invasive species, as in non-natives that potentially can root out other stuff? And if so, have you done anything about it?
We've not had too many. We have mink, and we had a big go at them over the winter. So I think we had a big cull of about 12 mink here because they were having an effect on the kingfisher nests. We've got a bit of American skunk cabbage, a little bit of Japanese knotweed, grey squirrel, obviously. So yeah, we are managing some of them. But over time, we might have discussions about that and whether they're part of the landscape and they come and do their thing and we accept them. I don't know. It's one of those things we've got to have a discussion about at some point.
Okay. Charlie, this is a question for you and perhaps also for your friend, Mr. Gove. You must have thought more than most of us, I think, about the possibility of bringing back species that once lived here but are now extinct here. Animals like wild boar or bison. We've had pine marten mentioned this afternoon. What do you think are the main constraints on our doing this? And have you any suggestions on how this problem or this constraint could be eased?
Wow. I've got Derek Gow in the room somewhere. I have thought about it a lot. I've talked about it a lot. I was chairman and probably still am, we haven't had a meeting in a while, of the Beaver Advisory Committee for England. We are reintroducing white storks back into Britain on this site. You may even see them this afternoon. I'm involved with wild boar. I'm involved with bison. I'm learning about bison. We have got some experts on bison in the room now, and we're going to hear about them tomorrow. There's a lot of, dog walkers is probably the easiest answer. Dog walkers stopped us doing things that we wanted to do. We cannot consider having bison in these process-led rewilding projects because of dog walkers. We've got 32 miles of public rights of way, and that stops us having bison. So that sort of thing is very easy to, it's a simple fact. On the boar, we didn't bring boar in because they were part of the Dangerous Wild Animals Act. So why are they on the Dangerous Wild Animals Act? Why are they still on the Dangerous Wild Animals Act with ostriches? Why haven't they been taken off? I think perhaps that would have allowed us to have wild boar, and that would have been a very different animal to have in this landscape, but we had to have a proxy. We had to have a Tamworth that wasn't considered to be a dangerous wild animal. I suppose it will be interesting to see what Mr. Gove does and what the government does. I know that, Ian, we've talked about reintroducing redback shrike. We've talked about, with Rob Fuller, talked about luring down other migratory birds that are making their way up north. And these are all quite controversial things, and I'm not sure why, but I keep on being told they're very controversial. But I think that maybe some of these species ought to be brought back into these landscapes just to show the potential of some of these species that are very unlikely to come back. And it's, again, something to talk about. It's something that people can then see, that's the sort of thing that we could have. This has been successful. This is something that we can then see, we can then spell out for changing landscapes elsewhere. So I think, really, my feeling is we ought to be pushing out those boundaries, looking at what we can bring back into these landscapes, really just to see if we can engage with people about what is possible and what these animals need, even though we haven't quite got there in terms of having the ecology ready for them. I think they need to tell a story and need to tell a story of how we can bring these things back, and that will then feed into, hopefully, changes in how we look at our landscapes.
Jake Fines, ex-house guest and long-term land manager in the slightly more fertile eastern region. 20% of farmers produce 80% of food on 50% of the land area. The farmed land area in the UK is 70%. How far do you see rewilding? What percentage of that 70% would you like to see rewilding as a reality and as your pipe dream?
Thanks, Jake. How many hectares are there of golf courses in the UK? How many hectares? Is it 320,000 hectares of golf courses? What about that? What about 320,000 hectares of rewilded land? Can we start with that one? Maybe we end up with 1 million. But let's start with just the same quantity of land given over to golf.
Here, here.
One of the suggestions that has just come forward from Miles and others, from Mike Allen, is that we ought to think about, in this group that we've got here, over a cocktail, about some of the words that we are getting confused by. Up on the whiteboard in the campsite, when you come back for your cocktails, will be an opportunity to suggest that we start thinking about this wordage and this confusion that it gives us. And Miles has come up with... Do you want to say more, Miles?
Thank you. You're going to hold that, and we'll do a double act. Very, very briefly, talking to Mike earlier, we found we were talking the same language but not understanding each other. And we came up with this thought that while we've got this assembled expertise here, and this goes back to what you were saying this morning, Franz, about forest and the problem of using that word, is that we could do a bit of crowdsourcing and come up with a very quick and easy glossary of terms so that when we're talking to each other and when we're talking to other people in other areas of expertise, at least we know what we mean. So we're going to put some proposals up on the whiteboard for you to either agree with, disagree with, leave comments, and help us out. And then we'll put something together and publish it. And then you can all then rip it apart.
And if it's published, everyone can use it, not just everyone in this room, but archaeologists, ecologists, everyone across the land.
That's the idea.
So if it's then adopted, it doesn't matter whether we call what we call it, but then if those terms are specified, but we can all start talking the same language regardless of what discipline, we have a category there. And you, here, as a result of this, can help move that forward.
Thank you.